Good evening and welcome to the Township of Woolwich Committee of the Whole meeting on May the 30th, 2022. We are now live on YouTube. I will do a roll call. I, Councillor Martin, am present and chairing this meeting. Mayor Shantz.
Present.
Councillor McMillan.
Present.
Councillor Merlan.
Present.
Councillor Redekop.
Present.
Councillor Shantz.
Present.
I need a resolution to convene an open session. Moved by Councillor McMillan and Mayor Shantz. Our land acknowledgement. The land on which we meet has been here from time immemorial. People have inhabited Southern Ontario for about 10,000 years, and we acknowledge people who live here when settlers arrived and who share this land with us. May we together learn to care for and respect each other, our flora and fauna, and the land we inhabit together. Do any members of council have any declarations of peculiar interest? Seeing none, we have no items to come forward from our closed session. So we will begin with our public meeting. The following portion of the meeting is for information only, and no decisions will be made tonight. Any questions can be directed to the Development Services staff following the meeting. I declare the public meeting to be open. It's a planning public information official plan amendment application of zone change for 15 Barn Swallow Drive in Elmira. This evening, we have planner David Gunman with us to provide us with an overview of his information report. David?
Thank you, Councillor and Chair Martin. So the following application has been provided to the Township by Patterson Planning Consultants, Inc. on behalf of Nomadic Elmira Towns Limited. The subject property is located at 15 Barn Swallow Drive. It's a corner lot at the intersection of Barn Swallow Drive and Church Street West. The applicants have applied for both an official plan amendment to the township official plan, as well as a zoning bylaw amendment proposing a zoning change for the property. The purpose of the official plan amendment would be to seek an increase in the allowed density on the site from 60 residential units per hectare up to a maximum of 81 residential units per hectare. And the applied zoning bylaw amendment is to help facilitate this increased density by migrating the zoning on the site from the current convenience commercial C-4A to a residential zone being R-7B. Ultimately, the applicants wish to develop the site as a mixed-use site that would contain 51 residential units. Of those, 45 would be as stacked townhouse units, so 3 blocks of 15 stacked townhouse units being 45 units total, with the remaining 6 residential units occupying the second story of a 2-story mixed-use residential commercial building. So that is a summary of the proposal. Our full information that I've summarized has been provided in our planning report, and I'll hand it back over to the chair at this point.
Any questions from council? Councilor Merlan?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair Martin, to David Gundrum. David, can you talk about the zoning that is currently on the property? You have it as a convenience zoning. I'm guessing that's strictly commercial. Can you just outlay what was initially envisioned for that property?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Merlan. Through the chair, the existing zoning, the C-4A, allows a limited number of convenience commercial style land uses. There was an earlier proposal that was talked about a few years ago to develop the site for expanded commercial use. but that never came to any sort of decision with council, nor through a formal review as far as I'm aware. Currently, the current zoning, the C-4A, would not allow the extent of residential use that's envisioned for the site through the proposed site-specific R7B zoning. So currently, the current zoning would leave the site predominantly for of a commercial nature, and what's being proposed is in a sense a little bit of a reversion from that, to have a predominant residential component with an accessory commercial component still permitted.
Okay, and that property, as far as the history of it, it's a fairly new property in probably the last decade or so. And when we went through the council, the planners, our official plans envisioned that being a commercial space for the residents on that side of town. Are there other options, like other plans, other property, I suppose, that would fulfill those commercial aspects of residents being able to get basic necessities within walking distance, the 15-minute community type thing? Or are we just expanding more residential? I guess I just would like to know if there are other properties in the vicinity that would accommodate the commercial aspects that were initially envisioned for the community.
Through the chair, Councillor Merlihan, the site itself, the zoning as proposed would still allow for convenience style uses, being a standard convenience store, medical office, pharmacy. So those uses that serve an immediate convenience need for residents that would be right on site for any future residents. As far as nearby similarly commercially zoned properties, the closest one that has C4A zoning would be a couple-minute walk to the east along Church Street West at the northwest corner of Country Club Estates and Church Street West. There is zoning on that site for commercial use, but honestly, in all practicality, you're looking at a fair bit of a walk from this location to arrive at any established commercial uses that you're referring to, Councillor Merlihan. But again, the proposed zoning as put forth would not deviate in any way really from the existing permitted commercial uses in the C4A zone. In fact, the list is near identical, save and except for the exclusion of a video rental store, which is not something that we really see much anymore because it's become a bit of a sunset industry, so to speak. So I hope, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I guess I'm a little confused when we go through these long-term planning exercises and we envision what we want for the community, and we spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on official plans for the community, for the region, and basically it seems like any property is up for grabs to do whatever you want with, and you go through this type of process and supply a whole lot of reports, and then there's an option to just change that. So I'm curious where this process goes. I would, I guess we'll hear from the applicant on what they have planned here. We've looked at some of it, but just the planning end of it, I'm initially intrigued, I suppose, on the process. So those are just comments. Thanks.
Any additional questions? Councillor McMillan?
Thanks, Chair Martin, through you. I'm a little bit worried that there won't be the opportunity for a video rental store. I don't know what people are going to do without a video rental store now. But my question is regarding the opportunity is there for all of the same types of buildings or of commercial activity that existed before. Is there a difference in the square footage that's allowed? Is this something that where we're just taking basically 1 or 2 stories of commercial activity and adding some residences in and around it and above it, and the actual square footage of the commercial activity would theoretically stay the same? Or is this going to be, you know, a big apartment building with kind of a token, you know, gift shop in the lobby kind of thing? Because those are 2 completely different things. Like if we're looking at, you know, a 5 or 6 story apartment building that has 1 or 2 stories of commercial activity on the ground level and the second floor, we can actually have the same amount of commercial activity with a whole lot of residences there. Is that kind of what we're envisioning here?
Through the chair, Councillor McMillan, what we're envisioning here is not an apartment building, like a large or tall building with some kind of ground level commercial use. What's been envisioned here is a greater degree of residential use on the site in the form of stacked townhomes that would be limited to a 10.5 meter height. What it can currently, and I might have glossed over this or not mentioned it previously, but the C-4A zoning does allow for dwelling units on the second floor of a commercial building, and that's under the current zoning. And that's what's being envisioned here is a 2-story building that would port over those existing permissions from the C4A. So we're talking a 2-story building. In terms of the commercial component, it would have several ground level commercial units with second floor residential over commercial, and then that the site plan, as everyone's seen, shows that building being located to the north of the site and sort of separated in a way on a site level from the stacked townhomes that would be located to the south in respective rows. So really this proposed zone change, or sorry, official plan amendment zone change is really about intensifying the ability to put more local residents on the site than what could currently be allowed today, given the existing zoning and existing density restrictions. So making, allowing for more density on an existing site, which is currently undeveloped.
Chair Martin, just a quick follow-up.
Yep.
Okay, so I understand that the desire is to intensify residential opportunities. I guess my question is, what's the next sentence after that? Is it at the expense of commercial space, or is it in concurrence with the commercial space?
Through the chair, Councillor McMillan, it would be, from my perspective, in concurrence with, but it would, the proposal as put forward, allowing stacked townhouse units, opens up the residential component to be more of the principal use, to have a permission that you could have residential as more of the principal use on the site. With commercial, you could call it accessory there too, but not changing the permissions for the type of commercial that's currently already allowed as of right through the existing zoning. So I guess it opens the door that this would be principally a residential site with some supporting commercial uses for not only the residents that would live on this site, but in the surrounding area that they would currently not have access to without having to go, to the east towards the downtown core currently.
Okay, I'd like to point out too that our applicants are here tonight, David Gardner and James Hockley, and maybe some of your questions should be directed directly to them. They should show up on the screen. Councillor Merlehan?
I'll wait until after the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, are David and James with us? Okay, we'll go to them. Next, we will hear from Scott Patterson and Glenn Reinders, the applicant and architect of the application. Please turn your video and microphone on, and you can Begin your presentation when you are ready.
Good evening, Chair Martin, Mayor Shantz, and members of council, staff, and the public. My name is Scott Patterson, and I'm the planning consultant representing the developer on this project. Bear with me if I could just share screen. I will bring up a PowerPoint presentation that we will use tonight. Hopefully you can all see that. So again, the property is at 15 Barn Swallow Drive and is subject to an official plan amendment and a zone change application submitted by my office. I am joined here this evening by Glenn Reinders of Reinders and Law. Glenn was the architect, or is the architect on the project. His office is also responsible for the civil engineering component. The subject property is located at 15 Barn Swallow Drive and is currently vacant. The property is 0.6 hectares in size, which is 1.57 acres. It's located at the intersection of Church Street West, which is a regional road, and Barn Swallow Drive, which is a township road. And it is owned by Nomad IQ, Elmira Towns Limited. This air photo shows the location of the subject property, outlined in red, with Church Street to the north of the property, Barn Swallow Drive to the west, Gale Presbyterian Church further to the west, and low density residential land uses on the east and south side. Rob
Scott, I don't
Road
think
is
your
location.
I don't think your PowerPoint's moving along with you.
Oh, sorry. Are we on the air photo now?
No, I'm not seeing it.
Alex, could we switch over and have you run the PowerPoint?
He's working at it.
Apologies about that.
One of the hazards of Zoom meetings, right?
And rural internet.
Yeah.
There we go. Next slide, please. There we go. So as I was saying, the subject property is outlined in red, with Church Street to the north of the property, Barn Swallow Drive to the east, Gale Presbyterian Church to the west of that, low density residential land uses to the east and south. And you will note on this air photo that there is a municipal sidewalk that goes across the property. That was inadvertently constructed on private property. And I understand when Barn Swallow Drive is reconstructed that sidewalk will be relocated onto public property. Next slide, please. So again, the subject property is outlined in red. One of the biggest design considerations, or I'll call it an issue with this site, is the location of a union gas easement. And that is shown in yellow on this image. It encompasses basically 50 feet of the property around the road perimeter of the site, out to put parking, driveway access, and things like that on top of the easement. But naturally, no building or permanent structure would be allowed in that area. Next slide, please. Under the existing C-4A zoning, the previous landowner had obtained site plan approval for the development of a 1,438 square meter single-story commercial plaza and associated parking areas. As part of that project, minor variances were granted by the Township Committee of Adjustment through approval A21/2018 in support of that project to allow an increased building area from 1,200 meters square to 1,438 meters square. In addition, the committee supported a reduced parking setback from 6 meters to 3 meters along Barn Swallow Drive. Next slide, please. This is the current site plan that was approved. A site plan agreement was signed. And as you can see on this image, it indicates the location of the currently approved one-story commercial building, the parking areas and drive aisles that were associated with that. My internet connection, I can still see the site plan, but I assume you're seeing the version of, there we go, the building elevation drawings for the previous commercial plaza. This is just provided for illustration purpose, just to show what was approved for the site. And as noted by Mr. Gundrum, there is permissions in the existing zoning. The dwelling units are permitted in the current zoning above a commercial building. So theoretically, meeting parking requirements, a second floor of dwelling units could have been added to this building. Next slide, please. So as part of our proposal, an official plan amendment to permit an increased residential density from 60 to 81 units per hectare was submitted. The proposed residential complement of 51 units, being 45 stacked townhouses and 6 dwelling units, equates to a net residential density of 81 units per hectare. Concurrently, a zoning bylaw amendment application to change the zoning from the C-4A with site-specific regulations to residential multiple design guidelines mixed use R-7B zoning, again with site-specific regulations, was also applied for. And this would facilitate the development of multiple and mixed-use buildings, and in particular to permit standalone residential land uses in the form of stacked townhouses. Next slide, please. Nomad IQ Elmira Towns are proposing the development of the site with a mixed-use building, which will face towards the Church Street West and Barnswallow Drive intersection. Commercial uses would occur on the ground floor of this building, with 6 residential dwelling units on the upper floor. The remainder of the site is to be developed with 3 standalone stacked townhouse buildings of 15 units each. Next slide, please. And this is a copy of the current site plan that was submitted with the application. You can see the commercial building located at the, for context, Church Street is on the right side of your picture. Barnswallow's at the top. So the commercial building is proposed at the intersection of Church and Barnswallow with associated parking and setbacks. And then the stacked townhouse buildings are proposed to the rear of that, to the south. You can see the surface parking provided around the site. And the stacked townhouse buildings actually have parking spaces located underneath the buildings as well. You can also see a blue dash line. And if I could use my mouse, I could show you, but there is a blue dash line that wraps around the perimeter of the property. And that represents the limit of the Union Gas easement. So as you can see, we've got the development pushed up to that limit as close as we can, but it is a defining feature on the site that limits where we can actually place the buildings. And a single access to Barnswallow is proposed, and this would provide access to both the commercial space as well as the residential units. Next slide, please. So as Mr. Gundrum had suggested, and as some councillors had provided questions on already, the zoning that we're seeking is a 2-stage zoning or a 2-part zoning. The first being regulations that would apply to a mixed-use building. And that's what's on the screen before you right now. And this would be part of the R-7B zoning. The list of permitted uses, commercial uses, reflect exactly what was permitted in the C-4A zoning, minus the video rental establishment, which is no longer practical or feasible on a site. So we're not seeking or adding any additional commercial uses to the property above and beyond what exists today. The regulations that you also see with regard to lot area, lot width, frontage, and all those other setbacks also match the C-4A zoning. There is a maximum total gross commercial floor area of 420 square meters, which reflects the size of building on the concept site plan. The current zoning allows for up to a 1,438 square meter building based on the minor variance that was sought and obtained. So to answer one of the questions that was already raised, the amount of commercial space is roughly just less than 1/3 what was previously proposed. And the reason for this, to be honest, was that the previous property owners that sought the site plan approval for the commercial building did an extensive marketing campaign to see what tenants we could find for that commercial building. They were unsuccessful in finding enough tenants to support that development proceeding. And a lot of the inquiries that we got for tenants for that commercial building would have required a zone change. There were also tenants that would have, in my opinion, relocated from the downtown core area of Elmira. They were businesses that were looking to relocate, and that would have had a detrimental impact on the downtown core. So we're not proposing any additional convenience commercial uses or any other uses beyond what the zoning allows. The restaurant size to 250 square meters, convenience variety store to 300 square meters. Those are also items that are in the existing zoning today. So we're trying to fully implement what is allowed today, also allowing the dwelling units on the upper floor of the building, but with a reduced overall size, again, roughly 1/3 of the commercial space that was previously permitted. Next slide, please. And as part of the site-specific R-7B zoning, we've also included regulations that would be specific to the stacked townhouse uses. The current bylaw does not contain a definition for stacked townhouses. So this zoning as proposed would contain a definition for that type of building, so it's clear what could be built. It also contains specific regulations that would limit the placement location of those buildings, the parking requirements. And this zoning is very site specific to make sure that the proposal that's before committee and council is what would be eventually developed on site if support was granted. Next slide, please. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Reinders, and he will run you through the building elevation drawings for the project.
Thank you, Scott. Welcome, Mayor and councilors. Pleasure to be with you this evening. So what you're seeing on the front elevation right now is if you're standing at the corner of Church and Barnswallow, looking south onto the property, you're seeing the commercial building, which is at the north end of the site and is giving a ground level, heavily glazed commercial establishment. When we sat down with the client and we're planning the site, they were looking for, yes, residential, but also to have, an inspired, elevated living environment. So basically, yes, commercial was essential to be part on this site so that it could support not only the residential on the site, but the needs within the area, but also to create the commercial building that had loft style living on top of it, since that was in the original zoning as well. So what you're seeing is basically about a 4,500 square foot commercial establishment right at the front corner, the gate posts of the site, which is reflected out to the community with loft living above it. And that's what's shown by the picture that you see now. If you look to the right of it, you look down south on the site, you will see the parking that is parking for not only the commercial, but then for the residential. As you come into the site, it's sort of you're coming in, commercial is off to your left and the residential is off to your right. So we are providing a clear demarcation, much different than what the previous proposal of having all sorts of horizontal commercial on it. Part of the reason for this is we're finding that commercial, and this is what we're finding in our business right now as well, the requirements for the commercial establishments are getting fewer and fewer, especially with the online buying and stuff like that happening, and commercial establishments already being available within other pockets. So we're not going to completely disregard it, but we have reduced it so that we can still provide a facet of it within this development. Next slide. So this is looking at the rear then. So if kitty corner is on the far side, if you drive around the building, this is sort of from the back side. So we do have a loading area underneath the building, which allows a loading to be obscured from the street and allowed to satisfy the commercial developments on the ground floor level. Once again, sidewalks all the way around, perimeter parking all the way around. So the commercial establishment is on one side of the site with the mixed use residential above it. Next slide, please. And now I'm taking you to the south end of the site, if you will, along Barnswallow. So there is the whole driveway parking area that is running parallel with Barn Swallow. This is the most southerly building, and this is showing the stacked townhouse. Once again, the overall height of the building not to exceed 10.5 meters. It is stacked, so basically each one of these blocks have 5 units per floor plate, 3 floors high or 2.5 floors high, because the first floor is brought down in order to decrease the height value around the building and actually bank the berm into it. What we really want to do is a very walkable community where there's good social interaction between the sidewalks and the balconies and where people will be, so that it's an active community. This is something actually that was, really inspired by the developers, that they're looking, a live work place that people can, actually establish themselves out of the Kitchener-Waterloo area. They can work from home, have their own establishment, have commercial just down on the same site, but they can actually live and enjoy the environment. So even the unit designs have not only bedrooms, but actually working offices and things like that in it, because it's the live, work, play in place, which was very important to the developer on this site. You can see that we've tucked the parking nice and easily off of the actual main access driveway, but it's tucked underneath the building so that we can reduce the interactions between pedestrian and vehicular traffic and provide a nice living environment without having the cars within that environment as well. Next slide, please. This is sort of moving along, so moving a little bit more northward, looking at sort of, since there are 3 buildings, there is 2 buildings that actually face each other and have the courtyard, and then we have a single-sided courtyard at the rear end. So you can see where the courtyard allows the people to walk in, elevate up, and really articulating a social space that can happen within this environment. That's been the enterprise of this whole development, of being able to have a spot that works well for people to live, work, and just enjoy space together. Next slide, please. And just sort of same elevation, pulling up a little bit more so that you can sort of see the extent of the walkways. So the walkways are in between the buildings and back along the rear side of the buildings, which gives a total walkable site around each residential unit. And once again, providing people their own space that they could have on a balcony area or even ground related. Next slide. That's sort of more the pedestrian, to give the feel of that pedestrian scale as you would walk along in between that space. So the units are facing into each other, not looking over the neighbors, but actually inwards towards themselves. And that's really been the focus of what's been tried to look at this residential development that is supporting the commercial that's on the corner. That was the last slide. Yes, that leaves it back to you, Scott.
Thank you, Glenn. So with regard to the policies and the regulations and legislation that's applicable, the proposal is consistent with the provincial policy statement 2020. Proposal conforms to the Region of Waterloo official plan, conforms to the Township of Woolwich official plan, save for the increase in density. An official plan amendment is not needed to add residential as a permitted use to the property that's already allowed. So the residential is really just an increase in the density from the 60 units per hectare to the 81 units per hectare as a maximum. Again, the proposal follows the commercial uses that were allowed under the C-4A zoning, with no additional commercial uses being sought, and site-specific permissions to implement the proposal through the R-7B zoning would allow the stacked townhouses and implement the project. Next slide, please. In support of the application filing, we submitted a variety of supportive reports, being an archaeological study, traffic impact study, functional servicing report, a noise feasibility study, truck movement plan, and a salt management plan. These are all with township and regional staff right now and are currently being reviewed. And these materials will assist in formulating the staff report and recommendation for the proposal. Next slide, please. So again, the proposal would see the development of a currently vacant site where formerly a 1,438 square meter commercial plaza was proposed. The site-specific zoning will direct the form of development and implement the project. The existing Union Gas easement is a significant factor in how this site can be developed. In our opinion, the project would be a welcome addition to Elmira, and we look forward to working with Township and regional staff and to the public feedback comments that we received this evening, and are happy to entertain any questions from committee tonight. Next slide, but I believe that's it.
That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Council members, any questions? Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I was looking at the courtyards and they seem that they look pretty in the diagrams, but they seem rather small. How do you decide how much green space you should have in a development like that?
Can we get back to the site plan? I can maybe explain that a little bit more for you. There's a colored site plan within the document. So, yep, that was it there. And since I can't point at it, I'll just talk to it. So what we're looking at, something that is when we were looking at green space, it really the social interaction that they wanted to have within these spaces. So yes, the buildings are closer together so that when you're on your balcony, you can talk to people on the sidewalk as they're coming and going and have that interaction space. So that's why we probably have larger than normal balconies that are out probably 9 to almost 10 feet. So they're in further animated. It's not like a typical balcony that you see on a lot of residential where it's, about 4 or 5 feet out. You can all sit in a row on a chair and that's where it is. We wanted the interaction was an important thing to the client. So we made them deeper and then so that people can be sitting on their balcony, still interacting with their neighbors coming and going. It's really a part of the focus that the client had from Nomad IQ to really have an integrated environment where neighbors would know each other and be in a resource together. So that is a reason for the closer cloister of the units and the larger balconies, which of course take down on the size, but give you the living space as well. So that's sort of how it was developed. The spatial separation works from building code standpoints for windows to windows of adjacent buildings, and things are offset to help work with that, especially up in the living environment as we move up the building. And the bedroom environments are on the rear side of the building as opposed to the front living room environment. So that was the reason for the sort of cloisters or the arrangement of the courtyard settings.
Yes, I understand that, and that sounds very nice. What I'm getting at is how much green space should a development like that have? It seems like there's not enough, just looking at it.
Okay. I don't know if there's anything zoning. I'm just wondering if I can pull it up on my own site plan here because I do have, overall, the green space on the site is more than what was on the previous commercial development because one of the things was it was a sea of asphalt around a commercial development. So we are considered 33% of the site has been landscaped. So that's landscaped around the perimeter as well as the interior sections. Our landscape space is patio and green space. So we've sort of looked at that. There is nothing specific through the mayor of a zoning requirement for landscape space on the commercial. So there's nothing that we had relatively to respect saying this is the minimum amount that we are allowed and that we have to meet.
Okay, thank you. Could I
Okay.
have one more question, Chair? Thank you. And that is, could you talk a little bit to the clientele that you're thinking that you are hoping to attract to this kind of development?
Yeah, I can speak to that through your chair. The goal is young professionals. The intent is, as Glenn noted, is that each of the units will be featured with office area. so those people can work from home. They're really trying to cater to the people who can work from home, who will work from home, are looking for that opportunity. They're also hoping to cater to a lower price point. I wouldn't say affordable necessarily based on the definition of affordable, but it does provide a lower price point for an entry level or a different option for a housing type compared naturally to a standard townhouse or a single detached house or something like that. So I think young professionals, younger families, things like that is what's being proposed for these, or hopefully for the residents for this project.
Thank you.
That's really to have an attainable establishment.
Councillor Merlin?
My question will be for staff, so I don't have any questions at this time for the applicants.
Okay, Councillor Shantz.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation through you to the delegates. Question I have is we have a snow removal option for the parking lot and things like that, but what about the steps? Is there enough green space where the snow can go when they have to shovel the steps and if they want to shovel the patio off or whatever?
Yes, there is. I'm just going to look at the site plan so I can give you an idea of the size of that, if I may. So the sidewalks in themselves, the width of the sidewalk going down the center is about 2 meters wide, and they have, which is about 6 feet, and they have 5 feet on either side for shoveling off to, and the patios are lower than that, so you can shovel offside inside the patio space as well.
And what about the steps themselves?
Yes, they will all be looked after at the development. It is mostly walking up into the main courtyard area is all ramped, and the steps only occur right at the buildings, either to go down half a level or to go up half a level. So you're only going a maximum of 8 steps one way or the other, because once you get onto that upper level, you then go indoors to go to the top unit up top in the stacked townhouse. So they are short runs of about 8 steps or 8 risers in front of each unit, either up or down.
Okay, thank you.
Did I miss anybody? Fred?
Yeah, I missed, thank you for the presentation. I missed what the square footage of these stacked townhouses would be.
They are a variety of, I'm just trying to look. My sheet here, so we are, they're the second or the main floor level and the upper floor level are almost 1,000 or just over 1,000 square feet. Down below, they are 650 square feet for a 1 bedroom. So the lower level is a 1 bedroom, and then the upper level are 2 bedrooms on each of the stacks. So about 1,100 to 650.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McMillan?
Thank you, Chair Martin. Through you, my question was going to be about affordability and attainability. You guys touched on that. Stacked townhouses are obviously much more attainable than a single detached or a semi-detached option. And in the township of Woolwich, we don't have a lot of housing options. Most of our developments are dominated by semi-detached, single detached. We're starting to get more townhouses. That's great. Stacked townhouses is going in the right direction of getting more attainable housing to people. When we talk about housing affordability, it's a huge component of it. There's probably no way to kind of speculate about what the difference in cost would be between a single detached and a stacked townhouse. I realize, and even if you could guess, by the time these come to market, it's going to be completely different. But are there any in Waterloo region, any projects that are currently being built that you know that you might be able to kind of put some numbers to that abstract idea?
Well, construction of residential stacks are about $265 a square foot construction wise. But that's without all development costs and everything else, but that's just the exact building size. So it's more of what do you get for that sort of size of square footage packed. And that's really the big difference between stacks and townhouses. That's, like you said, it's tough to make that comparison between the two. So
Fair enough. I apologize. Chair Martin, do you mind if I have a second question? We just had a project that was before council. It was a multi-unit building, and there were arguments for and against. And one of the fours was this was a multi-unit building, and one of the fours was from older people that were looking for places that they could downsize to, apartments or condos that they could downsize to. It's difficult with stacked townhouses to gear that towards seniors because of the levels. But I'm looking at that multi-unit building that's attached to the commercial space. Is there opportunity for that to be geared and make that more accessible for seniors?
So through the chair, that certainly can be done because it's a matter of taking internally to have an elevator to lift up for that loft. The way that these are designed, the stacks, the end units are ground level units that you actually walk in the side. So when we designed the stacks, we wanted to have, not that you would see the side of the building, but you would actually see the front door of both end units on the east and west side. And they are ground level entry to hit that barrier free so that we sort of hit that 15% that we're looking for by the code.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Patterson. Mr. Reinders, you may now turn your camera and video off. Next, we will hear from registered participant Douglas Dan, who is representing Gale Presbyterian Church. Mr. Dan, please turn your video and microphone on and begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Councillor and Chairman Martin. Thank you for the time to speak tonight. As said, I represent Gale Church and the Board of Trustees, who will be monitoring this project as it moves along. First of all, we want to be good neighbors to 15 Barn Swallow. We do have some questions and comments, and I'd like to duly note that I did on May 9th talk to Township Planner David Gunderman, and he did answer some of my questions. But again, as Gale Church, we wish to document some of our questions and comments that will go to the property owners and to the township and maybe even to the region somewhat if it affects one of our questions concerning traffic flow. With that in mind, a question that we were curious about at Gale was, would the 15 Barn Swallow driveway line up directly with the exit driveway and entrance driveway at Gale Church? And if I understood David correctly, he said no, it would be offset at 15 Barn Swallow from Gale Church and be closer to Church Street, sorry. We find favor with that. We think that's important because I think it will help the traffic flows and traffic patterns into both Gale property and Barn Swallow, or sorry, 15 Barn Swallow. A question I would have, which really is not specific, I guess, to the project, but I'd like to raise it because there is getting to be a lot of traffic. I travel through there daily at Barn Swallow and Church. There's getting to be a lot of traffic back up at Barn Swallow, trying to get safely out onto Church Street West. And also, as you know, the shoulder at Church Street West merges for the horse and buggies into traffic. So we'd like to raise that as a potential concern, that if at some point in time there should be a traffic light for safety of all. We do have a question about the parking spaces at 15 Barn Swallow. We're not necessarily against what's being proposed at this point, but I'll come back to parking in a moment, a quick word on retail stores. And I see it wasn't proposed tonight, but if there was to be a cannabis store in the retail portion of the commercial building, our church would not really be in favor. I understand that possibly potential cannabis stores maybe fit in a different part of town, which we would favor. That was one of our concerns. Back to parking. Is the parking sufficient? Maybe it is at 15 Barn Swallow, but we wish to raise it because we have some concern. Again, we want to be a good neighbor, but we want to address this tonight and note it that our parking lot at Gale at times, particularly for some special church services, particularly for funerals, weddings, and we're doing more community events all the time at Gale, and we envision that even more so in the future, is if we were to get overflow parking from 15 Barn Swallow, and I said if that overflow, as I'll call it, of visitors or whoever, or residences with multiple cars were to park on Gale parking lot, that might cause some parking issues for us. Again, we want to be good neighbors, but we do have that concern. And we've actually had a number of members in our congregation express that concern already. So we note that. If in the future that parking was overflowed onto church, the question I'll leave tonight for further discussion between the township and the property owners at 15 Barn Swallow would be, what assurance would we as Gale Church have if we did have parking issues at some point in the future? Hopefully it won't occur, but I think it's something we need to be aware of as a potential possibility. I think that sums up our comments and the items we're looking at. Again, I do want to state that the Gale Church, we do want to be a good neighbor to whatever is built at 15 Barn Swallow. And we thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. And with that, I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Den. Committee members, any questions? Okay, thank you again, Mr. Den. Please turn your video and microphone off. We will now hear from registered participants, Tina and Terry Lewis. Please turn your video and microphone on and begin when you are ready. Jeff?
Mr. Chair, Tina and Terry Lewis are not on the Zoom call yet. We will watch for them as clerks, but you may want to move on to the next participant.
Okay, next we have Justin Durr. Is Justin with us?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Okay, you can begin when you're ready.
All right, I'd just like to say hi and thank you to the counselors and the chair and everyone for coming to the meeting. I actually live on Robb Road, which is maybe like 150 feet from this field that's potentially being developed. And as the gentleman from the Gale Church shared, I also think that the parking could be an issue. Just living in Elmira, being more of like a rural community and based on that location, you're gonna have to drive, you're gonna need a car living there. So I just think that it could be an issue like in the summer months as it is. Our road and Barn Swallow fills up quite a bit with parking as it is with the existing residents. So by adding 3 stacked townhomes and the density that brings, I'm just a little concerned with that. And then also too, I was wondering, as the gentleman mentioned from Gale, would the region be willing to put a traffic light there with that intersection being so busy? There's a straight through lane there, there's a turning lane there. there's horses and buggies, there's a pedestrian crossing just down the road. And sometimes with traffic rolling off the highway, this seems to carry the speed into town a little bit, as we all know. So I'm just kind of concerned that by adding another driveway there with commercial and the residential units, it's going to be a major traffic issue, and there could be cause for safety concern. So I wanted to bring that up. I don't know if that's a possibility, if that's being looked at, but I definitely think a traffic light would be something that is needed. And I guess, yeah, and then the final thing I guess I want to say is I'm just kind of baffled on the site planning. As one of the counselors mentioned before, there's an official site plan like for the township and like for the town, and I've been here for about 10 years now in this area, and we welcome development, we welcome housing, we welcome commercial units, but to stack the multi-unit townhomes in this area that wasn't originally designed for that purpose, I just don't think it's the right place for that kind of design. And thank you for my time.
Is Jake with, yeah, okay. Jake, please turn your video and microphone on and begin when you're ready. There you are.
Yep, sorry, thank you, Councillor Martin, and other councillors and applicants. Appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. So we are residents on Bristow Creek, which runs parallel with Church, so kind of perpendicular with Robb Street, where Justin was just speaking from. So much like the gentleman from Gale and Justin just mentioned, I think we see Elmira as a growing town. I was born and raised here. I've lived here for 30 years, and now I raise my family here. So, certainly seen, kind of where the town has come from and kind of where it's going. I guess our comments and kind of things on the matter as well. I mean, and obviously to have the property developed would be great, because right now the new landowners, I know, I've hired somebody to landscape the property and kind of keep the weeds down and the grass cut and things like that, and that's great. But even just to see it developed would be, obviously nice. It's not a great thing to see, land sit empty like that. I guess our only I guess potential concern, with the property would be, there does seem to be a lot of obviously, residential areas going up, throughout the town, whether it be the country club estates, the proposed zoning and properties going in on, in behind Gale Church, between Gale Church and even Premier Equipment out the highway there. And how big of a subdivision that could be. So I guess, again, my concerns is being somebody that's, lived here for 30 years and obviously a lot of the counselors and stuff have been here a lot longer than me, but my concern is where do the amenities and the infrastructure kind of come into play to match that, right? So to kind of fit more residential units on that property, I think is a bit tight. And I just think that, while they may have had a tough time before with, maybe marketing for some tenants of the property, I just wonder how many more of these commercial spaces we have zoned across the town. Because again, we do need to meet the demand that the population is going to bring, right? And so the young professionals as well that the applicant, I believe it was Scott Patterson mentioned it. Again, young professionals. I think, again, that's a great, a great market to cater to. But I think they kind of come, kind of in tow with wanting those amenities and wanting those, those types of additional commercial spaces. And if that's not met, then, what happens to, to fill those properties. As Justin mentioned as well, I think the gentleman from Gale did too, whether it's a traffic light or a roundabout at that corner of Church and Barnswallow, I think would be an absolute necessity. And I think I'm guessing would probably be, fairly easily agreed upon. Because like Justin, I think mentioned, it's a pretty busy corner already, and people come kind of speeding from outside of town there. So to be able to put in some sort of kind of stopgap there would be good to just control the flow of traffic. And I guess really our only other, I guess, maybe comment or question for, for the builders or for the developers would be the question of, it seemed like from the drawings and from the I guess the drawings that were there, it seems like even not so much even onto the Rob side, but even more so onto the few Bristol Creek backyards. It seems like there would be for sure one, if not both balconies on that back side that could look right down into our backyards. There's already about a 7.5 to 8 foot grade difference from where that commercial property is down to our backyards, as we've dealt with lots of actually flooding issues and stuff. But my issue would be, to have it then a 10.5 meter building on top of that land with those balconies kind of peering down into our backyards, maybe is not the most favorable things for us as neighbors from a privacy standpoint. But obviously would be open to hearing comments or things of that nature from the developers. But that's all I have for tonight. So thank you all for your time, and I'll mute and turn off here.
Thank you, Mr. Redcliffe. Committee members, any questions? Mr. Redcliffe, you can now turn your microphone and video off. I think he has. I will now ask the clerk if there are any unregistered participants in the meeting for this report. Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have one unregistered participant for the meeting. His name is Tiago Estevez. Your procedural bylaw does allow for additional unregistered participants at public meetings, but they are asked to keep their time to a 7-minute limit.
Okay, we will hear from him now.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. So I just have a few questions. I'll keep it brief. I am a resident on Rob Road, and I do face my backyard facing this development that's going on back there. Just a few concerns on my part, and good things as well. The window that would be facing and the balcony that would be facing properties, I find a little bit of an issue. Like the gentleman before said, we are on a bit of a grading downslope, so it would feel like the balconies would be looking into our yards, eliminating some of that privacy that we have. Most people in their backyards have an 8-foot fence already, and that would not really do anything if you're going 2 or 3 stories up. So I find that a little bit of an issue. Another participant did talk about the parking situation. Like in the summertime, it is quite a hassle on Rock Road, on Bristol Creek as well. Like that might translate and people might start parking on our road. We already have very few parking as it is. Or people might go through the backyard that are not fenced in right now, which could be a potential issue as well. And from what I've seen on the site plan, it only states that there will only be fencing, the existing fencing, and nothing else added onto there. the loading part of that building as well. I understand that the idea was to get it off of the main road and in behind, and now that's going to be directly behind the people's yards as well. So if that's a potentially busy loading area, we might have issues, you know, with what time they'd be there idling. If there's a lot of loading going on there, that might, you know, again, draw some noise, some pollution, some disturbance to existing residents right now. Like this whole plan does seem very nice. I'm not gonna lie, it looks great on paper and everything. I just feel like for Elmira, this is a little extreme, I think, with a kind of with a high population density that it's suggesting. We have never seen any of this in Elmira, especially around existing residents, a residential area that's been there for a while. Like the one gentleman already said, I would love to see something built back there, but preferably something that wouldn't impact the neighbors that are there right now. And again, this part of town really has no commercial property at all. Having a third of what was proposed in the last site plan, I feel like it would be a little bit insufficient. So it would be great if there was more. But like I said, it did look really nice on paper, and I'm not just trying to talk negative about it. I just feel like maybe in an area that is not surrounded by existing residential right now. A traffic light there would be great at that intersection of Barn Swallow and Church Street. Is already a very busy area. I feel like parking is going to be, that traffic is going to be an issue as well. That's all I have. Thank you for listening.
Committee members, any questions? Tayega, you can now turn your video and your microphone off. Is there any comments or questions for staff? Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. There have been a couple of comments about the intersection of Barn Swallow and Church Street. Could I ask staff if there's been any consideration to putting a roundabout in there? One of the delegates made a good point about speeding coming into town, and that might also be traffic calming. I realize Church is a regional road, but has there been any discussion on that?
Through the chair, Mayor Shantz, there's no current plans to put a roundabout or a controlled intersection at that T intersection of Church and Barn Swallow that I'm aware of. The traffic impact study that the developers, the applicants provided in support of the official plan amendment and zone change didn't recommend the need for any upgrades at that intersection that resulting from the increased density that would occur on the site. There is, as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, there's a planned reconstruction of Barn Swallow, and that's currently planned for some point in 2023. Barn Swallow is a collector road that helps funnel traffic to and from Church Street coming in and out of town. So I hope, does that help answer your question, Mayor Shantz?
Sort of. I understand the Church is a collector road, so is Barn Swallow, and the two of them need to work together going in the future. Just wondering, before a development like this goes through, if we should look at what land might be needed should we decide to go that route in the future. So just something as you're working through this plan.
Councilor Merlan?
Thank you. Through you, Chair Martin, to David. If David could come back to answer this. I noticed in the list of studies that were submitted to support the application that the marketing study that Mr. Patterson referred to for recruiting commercial tenants to that location. I'm wondering if that study you'll be requesting to prove that there isn't a viable commercial option for that site, that they are citing as their reason for having the increased density. A study like that, I think, would be important for the township as a whole. As a Elmira councillor, I'm concerned that we can't recruit essential services when we are like just convenience or services, amenities services for the residents of that part of town that was planned for. If we can't recruit, then that's a pretty big problem for Elmira as a whole. And we'd want to find solutions to how we can attract commercial enterprise to a rapidly growing community. So is that something that the planning department will be requesting of the applicant to prove that there isn't a viable commercial ability for the original plan that is already approved?
Through the chair, Councillor Merlehan, that is not something that we've requested to date, like a commercial feasibility study, like a commercial supply demand study that would look at likely Elmira to itself, maybe broader than that. I can't speak to the previous site plan application, whether those studies were undertaken, and perhaps Mr. Patterson could try and fill in the blanks there. But what you're referring to, Councillor Merlehan, is certainly a study that we could request to help, provide additional justification for what's being proposed here today. But it isn't something that's been requested to date, no.
Okay, I know we have requested those feasibility studies when we look at the skyline, the foodland enterprises, and I think when we have planned for commercial space for that part of town, with the amount of growth that's going to be occurring there and no other commercial options, I think that's important that we know for sure whether this is not a viable option, because that probably wasn't a very good planning decision back then when that was made. And the other option, and we look at Breslau, and we've been promoting commercial on the ground floor, residential up top, and that's these are kind of where communities are going, where you get people and commercial enterprise together, working together. We want that in downtown areas, and here we have a spot that they could actually do that. We could have commercial on the ground floor in all those units and have residential on top. And here we'll be substituting that for just more residential. So I think any kind of decision that has to be considered. The commercial options in that whole part of town are very few options. So we'd be giving that up for more residential, and there is going to be a ton of residential in that area. So those are just comments that you don't need to comment back. Thank you.
Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. And I know we're not debating the issue right now, but could you remind me what commercial lands are available in the subdivision to the west? I believe that subdivision did come to us. And are there commercial lands in that subdivision, the Activa?
Through the chair, Mayor Shantz, I actually don't have an answer to that. I can't speak to that, but our manager of planning, Mr. Jeremy Vink, is here and could perhaps provide some better background on that than I'd be able to.
It's maybe not even a question that you need to answer tonight, but when it comes to us for a decision, that might be something that we might want to know.
Jeremy, do you have the answer?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to the mayor. There is no proposed commercial on the Activa lands. There is a variety of commercial C7 zone, which is a service commercial zone. Those lands are on the north side in the Lunar subdivision, and they just haven't really developed. So there is additional lands on the along the north side of the road there on Church Street. So there are lands there for more commercial.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Speakers or questions? Jeff? You're okay. I declare the public meeting to be closed. Presentations, none. We have some delegations. Before we hear from the delegates this evening, please be advised of the following instructions. Please leave your video and microphone off until you are called to speak. Each speaker has a maximum of 7 minutes. There will be a timer on the screen and you will be hearing a warning when you have 1 minute and your time is up. Once you are finished, please turn your microphone and camera off again. You may listen to the rest of the meeting or leave when you want. Council will hear from all speakers and ask questions of clarification. Council discussion and debate will start when all the speakers on the topic have finished. So we have delegates Jeff Murray and Richard May. The St. Jacobs Trail retaining wall petition. Welcome, Jeff and Richard. You may turn your video and microphones on and begin when you are ready.
Good evening, Chair Martin, Mayor Shantz, and councillors and staff. We've got a quick presentation we're going to go through. So Richard, would you like to start?
Sure. Let me just see if I can pull it up. Can you see that on your screens?
Not yet.
Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. We really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you tonight. We have, as I think you probably are well aware, a concern with respect to the retaining walls that have been developed on the back of our properties. We are a group of homeowners that are on lots 1 to 7, with the exception of lot 2, which is still under development. And we'd like to express to you our concerns and recommendations with respect to how retaining wall E should be remediated.
We have the presentation if you want us to share it.
I think that would be helpful. I can't see what's happening on my screen.
Alex, here we are.
Okay, can we go on to the next slide, please? And the next slide. Okay, Jeff, perhaps you could speak to this slide, please.
Yes. So this evening, we're not focusing on the retaining wall E integrity. We are only going to be giving context. The retaining wall E had a catastrophic failure in late 2020. And about a year after it was built. There was an engineering review and it recommended an inspection 1 year after the repair. And approximately 17 months later, there's still no report, on the findings. Next slide. Okay, Richard.
Okay, Jeff, are you going to speak with this one?
I did, sorry, next slide. So I just kind of, again, we
Okay.
don't, yeah.
I think the background on the safety and soundness of the wall has really heightened the issue for all of us. And what it brings about is kind of a deeper dive into, well, what is the liability related to this? As has been communicated to us by the township on a meeting we held with Jared and others on May 3rd, the township perspective is that the retaining wall is owned by the residents of lot 1 to 7, and as such are responsible for maintaining the wall that's located on their property. As we have communicated, we've looked into various measures to provide some level of protection for the risk that this exposes us to. And home insurance does not cover retaining wall repairs that are covered by soil and water conditions. So this really leaves an exposure that we've become quite concerned about. And I think, as we've communicated as well, insurance companies would have developed coverage for this type of risk if it was a common one. That coverage does not exist. I'm also going to walk through what the purchase and sale agreement says with respect to the retaining wall versus the township view that's being presented to us. Next slide, please. I'm going to refer to Appendix M and Clause 8 in the purchase and sale agreement. This was, for us, an 85-page document. Appendix M is on pages 83, so it's tucked away in the back. And this appendix includes a number of warning clauses, which I've demonstrated a few of them here. The purchasers of lots 18 to 26 are advised and acknowledged that sound levels due to road traffic or public trail system warning behind lots 1 to 17. So I think there were specific clauses included in here that addressed exposures, risks, warnings, but of importance, there was no similar warning related to the retaining walls and any responsibility to maintain them. I think this is a pretty serious omission. Next slide, please. The only reference to retaining walls in the entire purchase and sale agreement appears in Clause 8. Clause 8 says, and I quote, "The purchaser agrees that it shall maintain all infiltration galleries, fencing and/or retaining walls that may be required for the appropriate development of their property in an acceptable state and in accordance with the engineering and planning drawings, all to the satisfaction of the township of Woolwich. The purchaser further agrees not to impact the said infiltration galleries, fencing, or retaining walls with building structures or landscape features. The purchaser agrees to obtain this covenant from a future purchaser of the property." Next slide, please. I think it's important to pay attention to what Clause 8 does not say. And Clause 8 does not say that the owner of each property is responsible for maintaining these structures on their property. It says that may be required for the development of their property. And we find this clause to be quite ambiguous because without the infiltration galleries, fencing, and retaining walls, the community site plan in its entirety could have been developed quite differently from what it was. We've even noted the possibility that lots 1 to 7 might well have been created in a somewhat similar but slightly different position. And perhaps even some of the other lots in the community might not have been able to be established if the retaining walls had been in. I think this clearly shows that there's some question as to about what the retaining walls did to the site plan as a whole, and hence which ones were required for development of which lots. Next slide, please. We've looked at the Clause 8 from a lot of perspectives. Multiple lots being required to retain one wall. Who's responsible? What if there are differences of opinion between the different lot owners? If multiple lots require a particular retaining wall for development, what proportions does each of them share? And there's really no clear standard on what is expected by this township for us to meet these obligations. Next slide, please. So I think what we've been showing is certainly some lack of clarity around Clause 8. And it's the only clause in the entire purchase and sale agreement with respect to retaining walls. If I may take a moment, I will let you know that I had no idea that we were purchasing a retaining wall on our property. It's not included in the purchase and sale agreement. The only reference is Clause 8, which we really took to be a community-wide involvement with retaining walls generally. We did not receive a copy of a survey of our lot. The only copy I received of a survey I received in January of this year, 3 months after the closing of our property. So it's a little difficult to understand how we came in to be owners of a lot when there was no reference to it in the purchase and sale agreement. Next slide, please. The township has also been showing concern over the retaining wall. We've identified a number of items on here. I'm actually going to jump to the 5th bullet there, additional conditions of the township grading letter. If we can move to the second last page, please. Keep going. Yep, one more. Okay, this was the letter the township sent to the developer to grant permission for the grading approval. And you'll notice the bullet points down there list a number of specific requirements with respect to the retaining walls. Next slide, please. This is the letter that we received, which has omitted all of the conditions with respect to the retaining wall. If anything, I think there's a line in there that says, "Please read your agreement carefully, as there may be certain requirements or restrictions to finishing the driveway," but nothing has been passed on. And I think this is really important to understand that the only communication we've received is Clause 8, and we find it to be rather ambiguous. So I go through all of that from the perspective of liability issues. I think there's scope for challenging that. But more importantly, the retaining wall has been seen to be unsound, and we are concerned. And we're concerned about the potential liability falling on our shoulders of $20,000, $200,000. We really don't know. But it might not be just 20,000. It might be 20,000 multiple times. And I think for the township and for ourselves, I'll stop there.
Thank you for your presentation. Committee members, any questions? Mayor, Councilor Shantz.
Thank you. I just wonder if we could have staff respond to this. The one question I do have, though, before that happens is you talked about the ambiguity between certain items, but yet on your one slide it says the purchaser agrees that it shall maintain all infiltration galleries, fences, and/or retaining walls. And then on the next slide you say that the property owner are responsible for retaining walls, but you didn't know it. So maybe you could explain that that sentence to me.
I think one of the issues I'm seeing is different property owners in this community have come to understand the liabilities differently. So to me, when I read the purchase and sale agreement, and I'm going to tell you, I read Appendix M multiple times because I knew the retaining wall is in the back of our property and I wanted to be well aware of what exposure that might present to us. And I think some members of the community at large are hearing some of the message of the community's perspective that it is on our property and we're responsible for it. They may have one understanding. I certainly came into the purchase of our property on the understanding that it's a community-wide perspective. And I've grown up in the insurance industry. I'm involved heavily in risk management. I'm not a lawyer, but I look at, high expense items that occur infrequently. You need to have some kind of cost sharing program. Insurance works great for that. That's how the principle of an insurance program works. But to thrust a single property owner with a major expense of the nature that's showing up here, it's just doesn't make good business sense. You'll bankrupt some homeowners with that type of expense being thrust on their shoulders. And that just does not strike me as good practice.
If I could just have a follow-up. So when you bought your property, did it have that retaining wall showing on there, or when did you know that the retaining wall was going to actually be there?
I had never received any communications about retaining walls at all on anything except Clause 8 in the purchase and sale agreement. There was nothing. There was no survey attached with this. I had not received one previously. The only time I received a survey of the property was in January in the lawyer's reporting letter. And I'll tell you, the reporting letter is another 40 or 50 pages. At that point in time, it's a done deal. I will admit that I did not jump on the fact that the property survey included the retaining wall. I made sure that, some of the details that I was aware of made sense, that the adjustments that went into the sale of the property had been appropriately reflected. But I didn't kind of look at one of the back pages which had that survey on in enough detail to see that it included the retaining wall. I find out in March when some of our neighbors were expressing concerns. So, March, we signed our purchase agreement in February. It took a year for us to be aware that we were, owning a retaining wall. There's something wrong with that process.
Councillor McMillan. Councillor Merlan.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair Martin, to both of the delegates. I guess to both of you, would have you made a different purchase decision based on the ownership of the retaining wall? That would be question number one. And question number two, can you tell us about the process that you had with the developer of the Bromberg development when you raised these concerns and how they've dealt with it? Because as we all know, it's their retaining wall that they installed on your behalf. So can you answer both those questions?
Maybe I'll jump on the first one here, Councillor Merlan. In regards to, would we have purchased the property knowing the retaining wall is on it? I think where where part of the problem comes in is the non-disclosure of the wall failure. At no point throughout the process were we ever notified that this wall had failed, had a catastrophic failure. We were never provided the repair report. We had to obtain that through a Freedom of Information request. We did put that through directly, and we were told that they were not aware of a repair report for Meritech. And so that's, and we knew from discussing with the township that there was a repair report. So that's why we went through the Freedom of Information request. So, had we had that information up front, it definitely would influence the decision.
Okay, and did you have discussions with Bromberg on this? You've only contacted the township, or?
Well, I was talking with the township, and then so they recommended that we contact Meritech, and so we did do that, and so we followed the advice. We did not get the report as requested, and then the township advised us to do a Freedom of Information process. So we're following what township was advising.
Okay, so no Bromberg.
Not at this point, no.
And
Okay.
Pat, I would like to answer your question as well. I've had no contact concerning retaining walls ever with Bromberg. I think as I view the issue here, Bromberg has been perhaps a bit of a messenger on communication for the township to us. Those messages have not been coming through. The developer in this situation, there's an exit plan. They will be disappearing, but my hope would be that we will be happy, contented residents of our community for a good many years to come, and that the dialogue, the long-term issue here is simply between the two parties that will remain. So to bring Bromberg into the discussion, to me, doesn't really seem to accomplish a whole lot. And no, we haven't had any discussion. I think if I had seen information concerning ownership of the retaining wall at an earlier stage, and certainly as Jeff has noted, that if there had been any awareness on our part that there had already been remedial action being taken on several occasions, I would have been looking for a lot more safety and protection of what this means. And I might well have been asking for certain clauses, commitments, guarantees of some stability in this before proceeding. I think, I kind of look at our house being as close to the retaining wall as it is, and it concerns me. And to hear that the retaining wall is unstable concerns me. So if there's a failure, to what extent might that have some repercussions on my foundation? I'm afraid it's troubling.
And Councillor Merlehan, I'd just like to add one more thing too, is that clause 8 that was in the purchase and sale agreement came directly from the township to Bromberg to include in the purchase and sale agreement. So that's the township language that was provided, not Bromberg's.
Okay, I wish I would have heard a different answer on the contact with Bromberg, because if I was the developer and I had a situation, you were my customer, and I provided you a service that failed and you were unhappy with, I would want to know about it so that I could rectify the situation and make sure that I leave with happy customers. And you have, excluded the main participant, the person that did the work, from the conversation by not contacting him coming through the township. So I would have liked to, hear what the resolution was from a developer point of view to get you some satisfaction on the retaining wall. And I really think that would have been a first step. But as far as speaking with staff here, they've told you the position that they want to take, and I can understand it from a homeowner's point of view as well. But getting some clarity on how you would in the future maintain the wall is something I think that the township can certainly provide. But I'd like to hear, I'd like to hear the Bromberg situation of how he wants to have some happy customers and maybe further that discussion before council jumps in any further than after this delegation. Those will just be my comments right off the get-go.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Murray and Mr. May. You may turn your videos and microphones off now. Council, is there any further discussion or questions for staff? Councilor Shantz.
Thank you. I wonder if maybe Mr. Coupe could just explain to the delegates how they could proceed in the future. And I think he's done that already, but maybe there are other people that are listening that would be interested in that information as well. So maybe we can get some of that feedback.
To you, Chair Martin, to Councillor Shantz, just for clarity, Councillor Shantz, how they could proceed now or just in the future of purchasing property?
Well, I think you've suggested that there are ways that if the wall would happen to fail in the future, how it could be handled. I think our understanding is that it's stable now, but we're still doing some monitoring on that. But I guess, yeah, if it does fail in the future after the monitoring period and the warranty period is out, how it could be handled.
Okay, yeah, through you, Chairman Martin, to Councillor Shantz. So currently, right now, the wall is not entered the maintenance period, so it's not accepted. We are aware of the failure that occurred, and the delegates did speak to the reporting that was provided to them eventually. We are all awaiting the surveying or the monitoring of the wall to determine that it's stable and static. And if the wall is stable and static and not moving, then we would suggest that a fix worked, and then it would enter along with the other surface works in the subdivision would enter the maintenance period, and it would be the developer's responsibility for a 2-year period. That's the process that we're in. We haven't entered that process, but that's what's coming down the pipe, so to speak, and that is what we are waiting on from Bromberg regarding the wall is the surveying data. As far as future maintenance, there really isn't a lot of maintenance with a retaining wall. It's a visual inspection. You're really just looking at your wall and your property. The wall does support these residential properties. It does offer them usable flat rear yard space. In the absence of the wall, there would be a slope grading transition, and it wouldn't be very usable. It would probably transition to the wall that we have around the stormwater management pond. And I think that is a good picture in their delegation package, the picture of the retaining wall showing both the township's wall around the stormwater management facility and then the private wall in question. The township of Woolwich, unlike other municipalities that we're aware of in the region, does offer lot and block agreements. That adds future protection for any homeowner, that if there were a situation where a homeowner was derelict of their responsibilities with respect to the wall, the lot and block agreement would provide teeth to ensure that the township could, on behalf of other owners, impose that lot and block agreement and potentially go in and repair the wall and charge it back to that property owner. So there would never be a situation as a result of the lot and block agreements where the wall would just deteriorate or disintegrate without any help or support. The township's obviously going to be here, certainly well after many of these residents potentially. So we appreciate that, and that's the intent of the lot and block agreement. So that is a good fix. And then there's also access through that we've learned through common law rights, that any property owner, and I guess it would be looked at this way, if there's a retaining wall on your property, it is your responsibility. And this is not unique, certainly not unique in the region of Waterloo. There's a lot of topographical relief that had to occur here to facilitate home construction. And that's why you see some properties with private walls, some without walls, where they have grading transitions. The township has a number of walls to support its infrastructure around the pumping station, stormwater management pond. So again, not a unique situation. I think the unfortunate part here is that there was a failure. It's not an uncommon situation to have a wall, but the unfortunate situation was the failure. And I think that's probably spurred some of the concern. But that, again, is not, there's still a maintenance period to be entered into, and there's still work to be done on that piece.
And does that maintenance period, is that for the whole subdivision, when the whole subdivision is done, or do we do that in sections?
Yeah, and through you, Chair Martin, to Councillor Shantz, I'm not versed on the phases or stages within the subdivision. It could be done in phases, or it could be done all at once. Depends on how it was built out. But there are the surface works maintenance period has not been entered into. Surface works would include surface asphalt, curb, gutter, driveway aprons, boulevard trees, retaining walls in this instance as well. So there are a number of things that were be looked at, and then it would enter the maintenance period if acceptable.
Okay, and just one final question. And from what I understand, that lot or that wall is completely on the homeowner's property. Nothing is encroaching onto the township property.
That is my understanding.
Thank you.
Deanne?
So I just wanted to respond to that question about the phasing. This subdivision will be entering into maintenance agreements in phases in this situation.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. Can I get a little bit of clarification on the engineering reports that have been referenced? I think the delegation referenced a report that they got through an FOI, but then we're waiting for another report on the stability. Was the first report at the time of the failure, and now we're waiting for a report on the repair work, or could you clarify that?
Sure. Through you, Chairman Martin, to Mayor Shantz, that is correct. When the failure occurred, the geotechnical engineer was there to oversee the repair work, and they confirmed that the repair work was done to their satisfaction. It was signed off by them, and that is the report that the delegates were speaking to. That's the report that was ultimately provided to them, and that report was in the care and control of Bromberg. It wasn't in township ownership. And that's why there was a little delay on the freedom of information request, and Bromberg was gracious enough to release that report to the delegation. So everybody has that same information. So really, to your point, is that's what we're waiting on now, is the surveying or monitoring of the wall to ensure that it is not moving, and that it is indeed static, and that the repairs did hold up.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on. Zone change application, Conestoga Milling, Conestoga, Sawmill Road in Conestoga. That's getting awful close to home. Before we hear from our registered delegations for this report, we will hear from Manager of Planning, Jeremy Vink. Mr. Vink, please begin your overview when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council. So this is the zone change application for the Conestoga Mill, zone change 8/2020. And as you know, the properties are located on Sawmill Road, 1795 and 1805 Sawmill Road. It contains 1795 Sawmill Road is 928 square meter property. It's a small parcel there that has the old house on it, that old office building that was on the property. And then the remainder, a 1.4 hectare portion of the property at 1805 Sawmill is the main feed mill location. Originally, the applicant was proposing to amend the agricultural zoning that's on site with site-specific provisions, looking to eliminate the feed mill and providing a range of commercial uses, including art gallery, assembly hall, banquet hall facilities, commercial entertainment, distillery, a restaurant, indoor storage, showroom, etc. And then on the 1795 Sawmill Road, they were looking at maintaining either a home and or an office on that property. They've submitted a number of reports in that regard, but as moving through the process, it was determined that maybe it's more appropriate to move the parcel out of the agricultural zone because it's in a settlement and into more appropriate commercial zone, which would be the C3 zone, which we see in our smaller communities such as Conestoga and the main streets. So in this regard, the applicant, once we reviewed the application here, the applicant did provide some information to us and amongst various things that will address the regional and provincial policies as well as our own policies. So just in terms of all those requirements, you know, the provincial policy speaks to addressing, maximizing the servicing to sites, seeing infill take place in existing settlements where possible, protecting the natural environment and addressing floodplain issues. Similar policies are in the regional official plan along those lines, encouraging development in existing settlements where possible and utilizing those services that we do have. In this case, municipal water does go across the site. The site is on private sanitary or septic, as we call it. Just to note, because the property is on a private septic system and it is one septic system, they cannot subdivide the site into a condominium or divide the site in any more fashion any further from this. So it does have to remain as one overall site at this time. Also consistent with the policies, the applicant provided us the environmental impact study because in and around the site, we do have an environmental feature in the GRC lands with wetlands and a regional core feature of woodlot. So the study was done. As a result, the study concluded that the adjacent woodlot would not be experiencing any disturbance from the development, nor would the provincially significant wetland be impacted as a result of the development. But there are some invasive species on the site that need to be removed and eliminated. And as part of that, once they're removed, the site needs to be rehabilitated, those areas back to the natural environment. So they'll need to do some work there as well as do some tree compensation in that area. There'll be some best management practices for operating the site to prevent things from happening again that would impact the natural environment or these invasive species coming. And because of these works that would take place, there'll be certain times of the year they can be done just to mitigate any impacts to any migratory species or any other animals that are under avoiding breeding issues. So there's a whole report along those lines. Staff at the GRCA and the region are accepting of those reports, and most of that would be implemented in the site plan approval later on. Also, staff note they provided the functional servicing report. It just identifies that the site can be serviced with storm, sanitary, and water as appropriate. That includes fire protection. Also, there's enough water in the road from the main water main to provide servicing for the site. There are only 2 buildings on site that are proposed to be hooked up to the septic system. So as the two older buildings, main buildings on the site and on the feed mill site will be hooked up. They'll be hooked up to a biofilter system and they'll be below the ministry requirements. So it'll just be a building permit process and it wouldn't have to go to the Ministry of the Environment for approvals given the flows to the septic system. Portion of the site is in the floodplain. Those lands are identified. The applicant further identified them on site to verify. So that is captured in the zoning bylaw, and we'll speak about that again later. In terms of the township official plan, the lands are in the settlement of Conestoga. They are designated urban. The urban designation does allow for different uses than just residential, but typically in these smaller communities like Conestoga, you'll see a commercial core, which is our downtown area along the sawmill further up. And then the rest lands, although designated urban, are generally residential, but they're not that they have to be. And this is a candidate site to be considered for something beyond the residential. And as such, makes good reuse of the site, what used to be a feed mill, into something more commercialized that may help support the community and the core. The uses proposed are generally light industrial and commercial, similar to what you would find in the C3 commercial zone on the downtown. So there's not a compatibility concern anticipated because we have that in all our small towns where you got mix of residential and commercial uses of this nature. Also, this is probably a little better use on a site in an urban area than a feed mill. The feed mill with the trucks and the elevators was a bit of more of a disturbing use to the neighborhood in the past. So it is hoped that these new uses are more appropriate to the neighborhood and more appropriate to the community and help actually support the downtown in some ways. So in all respects, staff reviewed it and are satisfied that the application conforms to the provincial policy statements, the regional official plan, and the township official plan. As such, moving forward to the zoning, as noted, staff has noted the C3 zone, site-specific C3 zone is proposed. And that's generally allowing the uses as the applicant has requested, but not allowing straight retail. We're going to allow the retail to be on the main street. We don't want to take uses away from the downtown necessarily either. So this will complement the downtown by having the retail on the main street and adding these additional venues just on the outer edge. As noted, the floodplain has been identified on the zoning. It will contain an F suffix so that there's no development in that portion of the site of buildings or structures that could be impacted by flooding. Also, the applicant has proposed that the option of a distillery on the site. The functional servicing didn't get into that study, details about how that would impact the septic system at this time. So they need to do additional technical study to determine if the distillery or a microbrewery could be permitted. As such, they're asking for a holding zone to be permitted put on the site. The holding zone would allow the use if they do the additional technical studies and come back to council to lift the holding provision. So it's listed as a potential use, but would need to have the holding permitted, lifted to allow the distillery or microbreweries on the property. As with any kind of commercialized use, and we're kind of on the off into a more residential area, parking becomes a question or a concern. Staff did review the parking. There is opportunities for parking on the site with various uses as proposed to function on the site. However, the applicant will have to be cautious that they can provide all the uses and the appropriate parking on the site. They will need to meet our current zoning requirements because we're not giving any reductions therein. Also, there is a small portion of the site that will remain open space zone. That's to protect that portion of the site, and that's more to the east side of the site near the environmental areas. That will remain zoned open space, and that's identified on the zoning bylaw also. Just to note some of the key things along our snow storage, the actual parking, the truck turning movements, the grading and drainage, and any fencing or any of those final elements of the environmental impact statement has to be implemented will be put into place through a future site plan agreement. So any development on the site, the next step would be, if it gets approval tonight in zoning, would be to move forward with a site plan approval, and that would allow the site to develop appropriately. There were some public comments raised in the past. Staff has reviewed them and outlined them there. Some comments around traffic, access, and fencing, those kind of questions. Again, those are mostly tied to the site plan process and will be deferred to site plan. That's what can be addressed and reviewed, especially along the traffic issues. As a regional road, the region's satisfied that something can happen, but they will need regional road access permits and address the region's requirements for access to the site for safety reasons and how that's going to work. Realizing, obviously, something I probably should have mentioned at the beginning, this site does drop dramatically off Sawmill Road. If you know it well, it goes down off Sawmill Road and drops down almost the height of the entire buildings of the feed mill on the site. So it goes down quite quickly through a driveway that comes in off one side of Sawmill and then goes up onto another corner, another section of Sawmill Road. So the region does have to review that site access is reviewed properly and meets their requirements. All the other agency comments have been addressed to their satisfaction. As such, staff has in front of you the recommendation to approve the zone change to amend the zoning from the agricultural site-specific provisions to the settlement commercial zone with site-specific provisions, the floodplain, the holding provision, and then the O2 zone on a portion of the site. Staff is available to answer questions. However, the applicant's consultant is also here to go over things with you tonight. So if there's anything else, I'm here to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Council, are there any questions? Next, we will hear from consultant Steve Jefferson of K-Smart Associates, who is representing the applicant. Mr. Jefferson, you may turn your video and microphone on and begin with your overview when you are ready.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay? Yes, okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this evening. Mr. Vink has provided a good overview of the issues that have been dealt with through this process. And through some of the comments from area residents. One of them was the parking. And so for your information, the parking numbers that are included in the bylaw reflect what can be provided on site based on the concept site plan that was prepared. in order to get more parking, would have had to enlarge the area of the impact at this property and getting into some of the treed areas. So we were limited by the existing disturbed area on the site for that. And then when it comes time for the site plan and building permit, when the exact uses are being put forward, it will be reviewed by the township chief building official to ensure that any building plans can be accommodated by the available parking on the site. Touch briefly on the traffic and sight lines. Mr. Vink noted that the access issues have been reviewed by regional staff. In our discussions with them, it's understood that the western entrance would likely remain a one-way in only driveway, and the eastern driveway can provide in and out traffic flow. So from a high level concept, the region has accepted that there are suitable sight lines at that eastern entrance for in and out traffic. There's also reference to the fire protection. We did have a fire flow test was recently completed, and that information was provided to the township staff just to ensure that there is adequate pressure in the water system to provide fire protection to this property. The floodplain, the information on the zoning schedule reflects the most up-to-date floodplain limits that were provided by the GRCA staff, and we support the details as shown. And one of the other neighboring comments, there's a question about buffering and privacy. That again would be a type of detail that can be addressed at the site plan stage when exact uses are known and what portions of the property could be used. The intent is actually a great opportunity, I believe, for reuse of this property. It would maintain the historic buildings on the property and allow for uses that can be there for the residents of Conestoga and in a larger area. One of the residents that contacted us after the public meeting had the idea of a piano bar within there. He's a local artist who thought it would be a good spot to be able to have that type of entertainment in the community. So I look forward to see what future plans come forward for this. I'd like to thank Mr. Vink for working with us on the proposed zoning text and schedules that are before you tonight. The zoning text has been refined, and I believe based on Mr. Vink's suggestions, it is an improved zoning document that will clarify what is permitted on what parts of the property. And we look forward to moving forward on this. So I'm available if there are any questions from you, Mr. Chair, or members of council at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. Council, are there any questions? Mr. Jefferson, you can turn your microphone and video off. Next, we will hear from registered delegate Eileen Yorsch. Ms. Yorsch, please turn your microphone and video on and begin when you are ready. Jeffrey?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. Eileen Yorsch has not joined the meeting tonight, so you can probably continue.
I will then ask the clerk if there are any other unregistered delegations in the meeting for this report.
Sorry, I should have said that at the same time. Mr. Chair, there are no unregistered delegations.
Okay. Is there no other delegations? Council will now discuss and debate. Council, is there any further discussion or questions for staff? There is a recommendation in the report. Would anybody like to move that? Councilor Merlehan and Mayor Shantz. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That's carried. There is no unfinished business. There's some consent items. Before we pass a motion to approve and receive the consent agenda as a whole, Does anyone wish to remove any items for further discussion? Then is somebody prepared to move them? Fred, and who would second it? Larry? All those in favor? That's carried. Staff reports and memos. Zone change application, Township of Woolwich, surplus property, 28 South Street, Elmira, Kiwanis. Mr. Vink.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of council. So this is for the property at 20 South Street. We also know it as our Kiwanis site. The lands are owned by the Township of Woolwich. And we've been looking at what to do with this site. And as you know, we came into the council with a public meeting late last year to consider moving forward with an affordable housing development on these lands. As such, staff's bringing you the planning report in that regard. So similar to the previous statement for the previous application, provincial policy obviously does encourage redevelopment and intensification in urban areas, better uses of sites, especially on fully serviced sites like this. So we have full water, sanitary, and storm. And this site, just the location and proximity along a transit route, close to the downtown, close to schools, close to our WMC, makes a great site to consider for affordable housing, as it does offer a lot of amenities to somebody in the community to gain access to everything they might need within distance of easily walking or if they need to drive. However, as you know, the region has their policies, and they did have us looking into the site. The region did give some comments just saying that there was some concerns around noise. As such, staff did look into the noise issues. Noise was related to the former Waterloo North Hydro transformer station that was on Park Avenue. That site has been since decommissioned, and the actual hydro transformer site is removed. Hydro is just in the phase of cleaning that site up, so there's no concerns from that location. However, they did have us also looking at the noise from the WMC in terms of our air conditioning units, etc. There is some works that need to be completed at the WMC to get the sound levels down to the subject site, and these were always planned historically. They just need to be completed. As you can tell, these works are going to be completed in 2023. Includes the installation of a barrier and a silencer that needs to be installed. This would then bring the noise levels down to an acceptable level for the site at the Kiwanis for residential purposes at the front portion of the site. The back rear 19-20 meters of the site, the region has identified the noise levels would be too high, and as such, they did suggest a holding provision or just preventing development in the back 20 meters of the site for residential purposes. So it could be outdoor amenity area or parking, but not a building or structure. Noise warning clauses will also have to be applied in the future when we do site plan approval. There was also stationary noise, like I mentioned, the one with hydro site, but also Lions Hall, but neither of those were of a concern at the end. A record of site is required because of the change of use. The site was a different function in the past. Now we're moving it to more sensitive use, and we just have to complete a record of site. We're looking at doing a phase 1, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The region is satisfied that can be addressed prior to building permit for any new development. Generally speaking, the region has supported the development. Just noting though that geothermal energy units are not permitted, and just giving that for our references. In terms of meeting our township official plan, the lands are designated residential ancillary use, which allows for various residential uses on the property. Our official plan does address this infilling and does allow for this type of use to take place. In terms of looking at the surrounding area and the community, it's not unusual to see buildings of 3 to 4 stories, multi-unit in the community. It is also, if you look at the area, we got the WMC and behind, we have the high school just down the road. A number of our older houses in that area are actually slightly taller, so it's not inconsistent to see building maybe of 3 to 4 stories on this site, which would be appropriate to support some affordable housing on the location. Just in terms of density, right now the density would allow us 60 units per hectare on the entire site. We're waiting for the new official plan that we have in front of the region that was sent to them last year to be approved. We understand it's going to regional council this week, next week. It is going to regional council next week for approval. That regional council approval would give us 120 units per hectare, which would give us additional bone density on the site. As such, staff is suggesting that the zoning be approved and come into effect after the official plan is, the new official plan is in place. That would give us the appropriate density to allow for more units and affordable housing on the site. That would then be consistent with the official plan that's before regional council. As such, staff is satisfied that the proposed development of affordable housing unit up to 3 or 4 stories on this site would meet the provincial policy statements, the regional official plan, and the township official plan. In terms of the zoning, we're proposing to amend the zoning to the residential R7A zone. This will allow for various multi-type of residential uses on the property, so that would allow any future purchaser to maximize what kind of development they would like. So that could go from street fronting townhouses, back-to-back townhouses, stacked townhouses as proposed in this unit to allow for stacked townhouses, or an apartment building if the developer proposed that, whichever one. In conjunction with that, staff has looked at the parking requirements. With affordable housing, the region was recommending we actually drop the parking requirements to 0.7 spaces per unit. Staff felt that was a little low for what Elmira, and also given that maybe not the entire development would be affordable housing, that there might be some low-income housing, that a more appropriate level would be 1 space per unit. Versus going all the way down to 0.7. Our standard is generally, we've went down to 1.25 in some of our apartment buildings in some other locations, whether it's Breslau and on Elmira in the past. So we just figured 1 would be more somewhere in between what the region is seeing on a lot of their affordable housing sites and what's currently happening in Elmira. So as such, staff's proposing the R7A zone. There are some specific setbacks just to match up to tighten the building up, to bring it close to the street, just to give it a street presence, to maximize the use on the site. As noted with the noise study requirements, the rear portion of the site will have a holding provision on it just to prevent development on that portion with a building unless the holding zone is lifted if somebody wishes to do so, but there's a large portion of the front that can be developed without needing to lift that holding zone provision. Staff is also proposing to put in the zoning that the frontage should be Snyder, so the building does face Snyder Avenue. We prefer it not to face internally towards South Street, which is facing into the parking lot to the WMC. We also want the building to kind of just connect itself to Snyder Avenue. This also helps in terms of dealing with the Lions Hall issues that I'll get into in a moment. So as part of this, staff is also recommending that this is as a surplus land issue, that council deem a 43-meter wide by 44-meter deep portion of the parcel be deemed surplus. That staff then goes forward with surveying the lands and then moving forward with the RFP that staff has proposed in front of you as a draft. The RFP that I just want to go through at this point, just to note some key elements in the RFP is we were requesting at least a minimum of 50% of the units that are proposed be affordable housing and meet the affordable housing requirements of the region, and the remaining units be low income. Now we say a minimum where we would give bonuses to somebody who would come in with a higher percentage of affordable housing and less on the low income if they come in the RFP bid with something else. So they would get a bonus for that and may put them ahead of somebody else to win the RFP. Also in terms of the RFP, the affordable houses would have to be kept affordable for at least 25 years. There could be, we could bump that up to a higher amount, but at least 25 years is the minimum requirement that we'd be seeking. And as you can tell from the RFP, it is a very extensive document. So we're looking for a lot of information to assure the people that we're dealing with would be qualified, know what they're doing and moving into, and would and have a history of dealing with such projects. So we'd be expecting a good product from them. As part of this, we're looking that the lands should be somewhat shovel ready, which means we do have to retain that, get that record of site completed, which is the phase 1 portion. We maybe would move into the phase 2 to actually clean up the site, but the phase 1 identify what might be out there on the site that needs to be remediated. We do know the Kiwanis house has to come down, but we're not proposing necessarily to demolish it at this point, but that's something that may also take place. So as moving forward with part of this on the surplus land side, we will incur costs to do the surveying, the phase one, and any legal works, etc. So the township would incur those costs only, and to sell the land as is, basically for recovering those costs. So that way we make it more affordable and more attractive to an affordable housing developer to come in. Lastly, just kind of going through a number of public comments, staff will note a lot of concerns were raised by Lions Hall about, how this would work with their site. That site won't be right next to the Lions Hall. There will be a bit of a space in between. And the parking on the WMC and the Lions Hall should remain acceptable. There should be enough there, given the majority of the time of the sites in use. There may be obviously times when the WMC and Lions Hall are functioning at the same time that things will be busy and we will see overflow parking on the streets as significant enough to prevent affordable housing. I think that's it for the majority of the comments mentioned there. There are some about traffic. Staff is going to go through them. They've all been addressed. As noted in the financial impacts, there are some costs that we will be incurring. Staff has proposed the bylaw in front of you to allow it to the R7A with the site-specific zoning to allow a stacked townhouse, because our current bylaw doesn't allow stacked townhouses anywhere. So we're adding in zoning regulations to allow for stacked townhouses, as well as back-to-backs that would meet the same requirement, and that holding zone provision as noted. You have in front of you the recommendation that includes the rezoning, the declaration of a portion of the lands to be surplus, and then the directions to staff to move forward with this process. One thing staff would like to add after talking to the region last week, the region has made staff aware there's some potential funding sources that may help offset some of the costs on doing the record of site, etc. So staff would like council's endorsement to move forward with applying for any funding sources with CMHC or the region or any government agency to help achieve some additional funding sources to offset any of the costs. With that, staff is available for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Council, have any questions? Scott?
Thank you, Chair. Nobody can answer this. It's more of a comment, but we're talking about affordable housing, and noise is an issue that close to the WMC, but was there an issue with the housing on Sugar King Drive? Like those single detached houses on Sugar King are closer to the WMC than I think this project would be. Like it just seems like we can make things happen for single detached houses that we have troubles with when it comes to affordable housing. So that's nobody on our staff, and I know the order's opposite there, but it highlights an issue we have when we're talking about creating affordable housing.
Councillor Shantz?
Thank you, through you to Mr. Vink. I think I read in the report somewhere, and I see it on one of the images here about South Street being part of that property, or that property being part of South Street, or vice versa. Is when we do the surveys and things, is that all going to get cleaned up at that point?
Yes, through you, remember, Mr. Councilor Martin, Chair Martin, to Larry, Councilor Shantz. So when we clean up, it will still remain a portion of South Street, will be on the one side of the property. That will remain there and remain open at this point in time. There's no plan to close that portion, so that won't change. So nothing's going to change that way. The zoning is going to require that the lots front and face Snyder. So the zoning is going to require the facing of Snyder, and would basically not encourage any action off of South Street.
So that South Street portion, will that not be basically given to South Street and taken away from that property, or can't that be done?
So there, yes. So there is that South Street is the actual driveway into the WMC in Lions Hall there. So South Street is going to remain. So there's that. It doesn't look like it's part of South Street. It looks like it's the driveway into the WMC. But that portion on South Street west of Snyder there is a portion that is open South Street. It just isn't labeled that way or identified easily. That will remain open and remain part of a public street, and that will remain there. But we will take the lands next to that, being the Kiwanis house and part of the parking lot for this affordable housing unit.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Johnson.
I'll move the recommendation.
And with that, we'll add on the end potential funding that Jeremy mentioned. Correct?
Is that item D or is that an additional item, Jeremy?
That's an additional one.
Okay,
F.
then yes.
Somebody prepared to second it? Councilor Merlihan? Any further discussion? Patrick?
Yeah, thanks for you. Just a quick question to Jeremy. At one point in your presentation, you mentioned 3-story. Second time you said 3 or 4 stories, and you talked about additional density doubling after the new ROP is officially endorsed by region next week. Is there potential that this could be a 6-story if somebody put in the RFP that they wanted to, and they had enough density there to make that happen?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to Councilor Merlihan. Good question. The zoning bylaws restrict them to a height of 4 stories. In discussions with the region, who usually deals with affordable housing and developing these units, they say it is not typical to see anybody going over 4 stories. The costs just get too high just because of them adding an elevator, etc. So you usually see 3 to 4 stories is what you're going to get. Just from a costing perspective, it makes the most sense. So consistent with the neighborhood, we figured the 4-story height maximum would be appropriate. So the zoning is recommending a height of 4 stories. If they wish to come up with something different, they'd have to come back with a zoning amendment. The 4 stories would give them, staff have tried a few different designs. The 4 stories in a stacked townhouse unit would give them just about 100 units per hectare, which is just under the 120.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any further discussion? Councilor McMillan?
Sorry, thank you. Just along those lines, 100 units per hectare, 4-story building. What's the total number of units that you'd be looking at with those designs that you did?
We're looking anywhere around typical. We think it's going to be about a 16 to 18 unit building. If it goes all the way up to 120, it'd be about 22, 23 units on the property. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, this has been moved and seconded. All those in favor? And that's carried. Next, we go to the building section. Staff increase request. We have with us our chief building official, Dave. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Martin, and through you to all of council. I would quickly like to touch on a couple of the items in the report. First are the types of complex buildings that we are now seeing in the township being built on a regular basis. Historically, I would say we used to see large industrial buildings. Then we went through the years of seeing multiple hotels, and these types of projects were often the one large significant project we would get that year. We are seeing now that these types of multi-residential and commercial projects are happening much more frequently. Examples of these projects are apartment buildings, expansions at the Waterloo Regional Airport, which take a significant amount of staff time to plan review and complete inspections. Looking at what applications we currently have in our system, there's another $12 million expansion at the airport and a $15 million project in St. Jacobs. With what we have done statistically to the end of April, those 2 permits will push us over $75 million in construction value year to date. And for comparison, we used to look at 90 to 100 million construction value as a banner year for the entire year. The second item I would like to touch on quickly is the lack of qualified building officials in the industry to hire. This is a problem all municipalities are facing, and there is the possibility that new building official hires will need significant training and need to write the qualification examinations through the province, and this will take time. So as we are looking at increased permit numbers year over year, with 2 additional subdivisions coming soon and the complexity of the buildings we are seeing, staff believe recruitment is needed to ensure that we have qualified staff as we continue to grow and be busy. And the report, also touches on the building consultant that we've hired in the past. And this really is a stopgap solution and is not financially reasonable as a long-term solution. And finally, I wanted to share that I did reach out to one of our repeat customers who we see a significant amount of work from, and they voiced their support for additional staff, even if that were to come with permit fees being reviewed and potentially being increased. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions about the report.
Council, any questions? Councillor Shantz.
Thank you, through you, Dave. Just an interest question, I guess, more so. Does the same inspector typically do the same building, or do they cross over the inspections?
Yeah, good question, Councillor Shantz. So we have to be qualified in all the different areas that we plan, review in, and do inspections in. So if you are qualified through the province to do house inspections or small building inspections, then that's what you're allowed to do legally. If you have large buildings and complex building qualifications, you're then allowed to go into the apartment buildings and the hotels and the larger buildings. So we do have some staff that are qualified with multiple qualifications, and they can go from a farm building into the airport or a hotel. And then we have other inspectors that more just stick towards the residential stuff.
So with the lack of inventory, if I could say that, what are the chances of finding 2 building inspectors in the near future?
Based on what I'm hearing from the industry, that is a challenge at the moment. Knowing who other municipalities are hiring, it sounds like it's going to take time to get them qualified. There's just a lack of qualified building officials. There's just not enough to go around to all the municipalities that need them.
And are the other area townships having the same problem, or do they have extra help that they could lend us in the meantime, or is that not an option?
No, yeah, not really an option we've ever explored. We've never explored the cross-border kind of agreement for building officials. I think everybody is kind of scrambling in their own municipality to get work done.
Okay, thank you.
Patrick.
I'll move the recommendation as requested.
Somebody will second it. Scott? Any further questions? All those in favor? That's carried. Next, we have LED lighting installation at Lions Ballpark. We have with us Manager of Operations and Projects, Thomas. Floor is yours.
Good evening, Council. Through you, Chair Martin. So the first RCS report that we have on the agenda tonight is the award recommendation for the LED lighting and pole installation at Lions Park in Elmira to Century Electric. So this capital project was originally budgeted and tendered for in 2019. However, we did not carry out the work at that time due to submissions exceeding what we had allocated. So staff applied for Ontario Trillium funding in 2022, and we were successful in receipt of $250,000. And then council supported an additional $50,000 on top of this. So the township utilizes Musco lighting at a number of our sports facilities. It's integrated with our booking software. They include all engineering design works, and they come with a 25-year warranty, which is extremely helpful for replacing of bulbs and fixtures and that sort of thing. This will be our first LED sports field lighting project, with all the existing diamonds being high density discharge bulbs. And then lastly, the work is scheduled to take place at the end of the summer as a condition of the grant. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions council may have.
Any questions? Patrick?
Yeah, thanks. Through you. Not a question, just a comment. It's really great that we got that funding. That's amazing. And let's get this project done. So I'll move the recommendation as written.
Sorry. And it's two hands I didn't see. All those in favor? Thank you. That's carried. Next, Mary Hill Fire Station replacement. Thomas, you're back.
Perfect. Again, through you, Chair Martin. So staff have before council the award recommendation for Mary Hill Fire Station construction by recommendation for DOM construction at a total cost of 1.6 million after the HST rebate. So following discussion with and at the request of council and fire staff during 2022 budget deliberations, staff issued a request for proposal for a design build station construction. Staff received two proposals, one from DOM and the other from Fry Building Contractors. And following evaluation of the proposals and bids by a committee that included fire, finance, and RCS staff, DOM received the highest overall score. Fire staff involved in the evaluation included Chief Aldis and both the district and deputy chiefs. So DOM has proposed a similar site plan to the existing configuration on the lot now. Additionally, the building design has incorporated the majority of the design elements requested through the RFP. Costing for absent items has been obtained and included in the total that you see before you tonight. So staff anticipate that the decision was made by DOM to submit a bid that was on budget at 1.3 million. However, as I just mentioned, we have obtained costing for a few of the items that were absent, and we've included those. Also included with the bid that you have before you is the two additions. So the front roof awning and the fire alarm system, and then cash allowances as well. So staff are pleased with the schedule that was submitted, very pleased with the schedule actually, with a start date right away. Pleased with the references. DOM has completed 25 fire station buildings since 1989. And staff are pleased with the design as well too, and fire staff are. And then staff proposed that the budget deficit be offset through 2022 pre-budget approval, utilizing infrastructure reserve funds and development charges. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Council, any questions? Councilor Shantz.
Thank you, through you to Thomas, and I guess really no question, just a comment. I'm glad to see that this building is actually being built rather than renovated. I think it was a good move in that direction. I never did like the idea of renovating that building because of the costs, and they just kept escalating. And I think we're going to end up with a good product at the end. One question I do have is, how was the process doing a design build rather than the other type of build that you wanted to do? How did you find that process?
Through you, Chair Martin, to Councillor Sean. So I guess the tendering process is unique because we received designs within 3 weeks versus going through designing the buildings ourselves, which took half a year to 3/4 of a year. Time will tell how the construction process goes, but I think that DOM has a very reputable history in Southern Ontario with a lot of their stations. They've done, more cost-effective stations like what we have proposed, and multi-million-dollar facilities as well too. So time will tell, but I'm confident in working with DOM and one of the owners, Jake Dom there. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It would be nice to keep in touch as to how that is going and how you feel about that going forward and in other types of scenarios as well. Then, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any further questions? Larry, are you going to move this?
Yes, I am.
Thought so. Thank you. Who would second it? Mayor Shantz. Any further questions? All those in favor? That's carried. And I would just like to say thank you to Councillor Shantz. We had a great time working together on this project, and we achieved what we set out to do. And we even saved $100,000 from the original price of renovating, and we're getting a brand new building. So that should certainly please the people in Maryhill. So thanks again, Larry. Other business. Council reports and updates. Are there any reports from council? Fred.
Yeah, I sit on Tweak on behalf of council. And so Tweak and Trees for Woolwich have a concern about whippersnippers going around the trees, and they've encountered some tree mortality. So Thomas has been in conversation with Inga Rinnie of Trees for Woolwich. So Thomas has a report on behalf of himself and Rinnie. So Thomas.
Thanks, Councillor Redekop. Through you, Chair Martin. So I don't necessarily have a report, but I'd like to provide council a bit of an update and looking for some direction either in 2022 or as a part of 2023 budget deliberations. So staff are aware of the report that was provided by Trees for Woolwich and the state of park trees as a result of past operational practices. And we have had some discussion, constructive discussion with Trees for Woolwich to discuss both short and long-term goals over the past month. Staff intended to bring this forward as a part of 2023 budget deliberations, but like I said, we're happy to provide an update for council now. So as council is aware, the township contracts our turf maintenance through township properties, the majority of it being. In recent years, we have gradually assumed control over some of our primary parks, including Breslau Memorial, Maryhill, Bloomingdale, in an effort to better control and manage our service standards. So not necessarily specific to this issue, this is an important one, but also with regards to maintenance of our sports fields as well too. And we want to ensure that the product we're providing our minor sports organizations is appropriate in grasses and lawn, that sort of thing. So that's something that we have invested in. We invested in 2019 when we issued the most recent turf tender. We purchased some equipment, that sort of thing, and we are looking to ramp that up again moving into 2023. So the two issues that are at hand that were brought up through the report are a tree replacement program and cost, as well as maintenance. So in terms of tree replacement, council has approved $20,000 from the Greening and Climate Action Reserve Fund for parks specifically for tree planting. And then there's another $25,000 for boulevard trees that comes out of that reserve as well. So there is always option to increase our use of these funds, the piece of the pie here for tree replacements. We have roughly $190,000 annually that gets contributed to this reserve. So we could look to increase that in 2023 and bring that forward as a part of budget deliberations. And then the main issue here and the solution is maintenance. So short term, staff have had discussion with our contractor to request, I guess over the last couple of weeks now, that they cease string trimming on all the small to medium caliber trees. And when I say that, I mean just a few inches out from the base of every tree. We've provided some internal staff training for our seasonals, and then we continue with installation of tree guards and mulching, utilizing our two seasonal horticulture staff. Long-term solution here and kind of the fundamental solution to string trimmer damage is mulching and installing tree guards on all of our small to medium caliber trees, which is no small task. And it's not a one-time fix either. It's an annual program, the same as you would do, at your home, and we do at our other township properties. We mulch annually. Additional resources would be required for that, and I'm not sure that that's something that council has an appetite for in 2022. Maybe staff can bring forward that request through 2023 budget deliberations. With that being said, if that waits till 2023, we would look from some guidance from council as well too on if you are okay with our current approach and not string trimming trees, small to medium caliber trees. And with that, staff could do some social media campaigning, that sort of thing, to advise residents of why we're doing that this year. I do have some figures that I can share with regards to what it would cost for us to up our staffing and put a program in place, an annual program in place where we are mulching trees every year. But that does include a couple additional seasonal staff for 4 months, an additional vehicle rental for the season, material, fuel, that sort of thing. Yeah, so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have. And again, just looking for some direction on what council would like to see this year. If you're fine with the short-term approach and come back at 2023 budget deliberations, or would you like us to move forward with something in 2022?
Mayor Schatz.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. First of all, you said you did some costing on what it would cost. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Through you, Chair Martin. So 2 seasonal staff for us for a 16-week period would cost $25,600. A vehicle rental for a 4-month season, which is what we've done the last few years for our seasonals, is $5,000. Material, a couple $1,000, and then fuel, $2,000 for the summer. So we're looking at roughly $35,000.
Okay. And what would the value of the trees that we're losing be?
Through you, Chair Martin, to Mayor Shawns, that's a good question. Staff have not had time to do a full assessment of all of our parks. I know that Trees for Woolwich has included evaluation in their report, which I guess we could reference, but that's only a portion of our parks, and so we would need to do a little bit more analysis. That also is accounting for, I believe, a 3-tree-to-1 replacement, which is for our parks. We're not meeting that standard as it is in terms of replacement. It would be a 1-for-1 if that, and I believe that would be the same for our boulevard tree replacement program as well, 1-for-1.
And is that because of personnel?
Primarily, it would be primarily budget. Tree plantings, we're running into operational difficulties with watering is a huge task when we're planting, because we water for 2 years weekly. And so it's a staff, it's equipment, vehicle, as well as the cost for trees as well too.
So if I could, I have one more question, and this might be for Richard. How much money do we have left in the environmental reserve?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think by the end of this year, you would have roughly about 84,000 available to council. Yeah, given that we're going to be transferring in another 193,000 this year, and I think we have about 229,000 that's currently in our 2022 capital and operating budget. Yeah, it leaves you with about 84,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Schatz.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Vanderhoff. Sorry. Question I have is, I think over the past number of years, we've got more aggressive trimming line as well. And would it be helpful to go to a smaller line that would cause less damage?
Chair Martin, to Councillor Schatz. To my knowledge, I think this has been going on for a number of years now. I believe Councillor Bowman. This has been something that he's brought forward in years past. And I can speak to our environmental coordinator, Ann Roberts, who was actually at a course last week. And this is an issue that's occurring industry-wide across a number of municipalities. So some have taken the approach of stopping string trimming. What comes with that is not quite as neat of a park appearance. And then, as I mentioned, the only other alternative is really truly, making sure that we're mulching our trees every year and getting tree guards on them. In terms of line, I guess I could consult with our contractor, but there is a possibility that that's the case as well.
Yeah, I guess the problem, if we kill a 2 or 3 or 4 year old tree, obviously if we replace it, it's going to take a number of years to have that grow again. And then we've already lost those 2 or 3 or 4 years. I would suggest that we stop trimming as close like you suggest and leave it a little more rough and see if we get any complaints or any pushback from the public. And if we don't, maybe that's the option for this year, and then we can talk about it further, for the next budget year.
And that's the approach that we have taken the last few weeks, and we have noticed it in some of our parks as well too. I don't believe we've received any complaints, but like I mentioned, we would be, and Trees for Woolwich has offered their assistance too, but we could do some social media posting as well too, just with regards to why it's being done.
Councilor McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Martin. Through you, I'd be in support of not weed whacking trees. We're talking about public parks. If there's a little grass around the trees, we're not talking about, perfectly manicured country club golf courses. Like, I mean, if we're getting complaints about grass growing around trees, I think we can handle that one. My concern with the mulching would be, it's harmful for trees to have mounds of mulch around them. Like, if you're not doing that properly, that's unhealthy for trees as well. So unless you're out there monitoring that as well, that can create, all kinds of different problems for trees. So I'm in favor of just not weed whacking it, and I'll take the complaints.
Any other questions? Thomas, is it not just quick to edge out the grass around the tree? Maybe put a little mulch around the tree and you wouldn't have to go anywhere near with your string trimmer?
Yeah, that's ideally that's the approach. And we'll utilize what staff time we have this year to continue doing that when we have time, and getting tree guards on trees, because that's a pretty quick solution. And as a part of 2023 budget, if staff, I guess, depending on how the rest of this season goes, staff will bring back a funding request if we feel like that's the route we want to go in 2023. But for the time being, we'll stop string trimming.
Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. Is there any appetite to use the money in the reserve to hire seasonal staff to cut around the trees and mulch or not mulch, but to create some space around the trees? How does the rest of council feel about that?
Councilor Shantz?
I'd make a different suggestion. I would suggest that if we have contractors that are trimming the trees now, maybe we can trade off them putting the guards around and not trim. And if we supply them with the guards and say, next time you're out mowing, put the guards around them and don't bother trimming. And I think that would be a good trade-off, and it wouldn't cost us anything other than the guards.
Good idea. Fred?
Yeah. I agree with Larry's suggestion because it doesn't increase staff time. So I would agree with Larry.
Okay, any further discussion? Thomas?
Yeah, if I could chime in. Thanks, Chair Martin. I guess I would need to have the conversation with our contractor, just provided that that's not part of their contract that's in place right now.
Okay, and Councillor Shantz?
Yeah, but I guess if we're paying them to do the trimming, I think we should be able to talk pretty nice to them and get them to do that instead of the trimming, because it's going to take a lot less time at the end of the year. They'll save money. So I would hope that they would be open to that and amenable to that.
Any further discussion? Okay. Outstanding activity list. Is there anything there? Notice of motion, none. I take a motion for adjournment. Everybody's Larry, Pat? All those in favor? Everybody. Council would like to thank all who participated or tuned, pardon me, into the meeting tonight on our live YouTube live stream. I will remind council to stay tuned or stay connected until we receive confirmation that the live stream has stopped. Must be getting late. Good night, everyone.